Hey Jen, can you hear me? Not sure if that is. Gonna open back up Zoom. Okay.
I can hear you.
See, how are we doing? Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, perfect.
Sorry to, I didn't mean to be a host.
Oh no, you were okay. I'm glad you can make it.
Yeah,
We've already had a couple people walk in, so that's great.
wonderful.
Andy, Reed, can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay, perfect. Can you see our screen?
I can.
Okay, let me adjust that really quick.
The screen, the presentation screen is in like
Is it mirrored?
no, it doesn't look like it's in the presentation mode. I can see the next slide.
Both. So they're getting our screen camera, which is pointed there, and I'm sharing the screen. So it
It's
should,
it's okay though. It just doesn't have, it's not a full screen, but we can see that slide that you're on.
okay. Sorry, I'm trying to,
I'll be right back.
there we go.
That's fine.
Two little kids there. Buy apples from us. Don't forget that, yeah.
And then we'll share our PowerPoint slides at the same time.
Yes. So we should be screen sharing
Yeah.
this.
Perfect.
Okay. What does it look like now?
It's a nice picture of the lake and everything.
It took me a long time to find good pictures.
Yeah, it's a good picture though. And, so you guys looking for pictures that were supposed to be nice for presentation. It's the only picture that I found of invasives. I have to take better pictures.
Yeah.
Depressing.
So maybe if I'm gonna stop sharing really quick.
So everything's good.
So I'm glad we're all on early so we can figure out the technical issues now.
Whoa. Hi, feel free to help yourselves to any refreshments.
Oh, no.
And look at
Let's
any
go
of the flyers.
here.
and then come
Okay.
grab a seat.
Share,
Thank you for doing that.
share.
Oh,
Okay. Maybe if I do it this way, it'll work a little better. Okay. Okay, can you guys see my screen on Zoom?
Yes, but
It's only showing the presenter view?
mhm.
Interesting.
Okay, though.
It's doing.
No seat, no trophy.
Okay, I'll take it.
There we go. How about that?
Yep.
Okay. Oh, interesting.
wait.
Got a lot of screens going on here. I think that's the thing that's happening. So let me get this figured out one moment.
This meeting is being recorded.
This is just us. Yeah, maybe.
Okay. I think we might have everybody on. Sorry, everybody on Zoom. This is a new method for us, but here's who we have in the room with us. Welcome to the show. Glad you could all be here. Thank you for bearing with us. We're going to do our best to make sure you guys can see the screen or at least the slides. And if at any point you can't, please feel free to reach out through the chat or unmute yourself and be like, hey, I can't see, or I don't know what's going on at any point in time. You guys also can't see me. Hello, it's me, Olivia. I'm standing in front of the PowerPoint screen, being blinded. But we're gonna go ahead. We'll do a little bit of introductions. We'll talk about everybody who's in the room, and then we'll go ahead and get started because we have 2 hours together. So I hope everybody enjoys it. We're gonna go ahead and I'm gonna attempt to share my screen. Let's see how well it works. Please bear with me. Anything that we talk about today will be shared in an email afterwards. So if for some reason your computer shuts down or our computer shuts down, because when does technology ever work the way you need it to? You will be getting information in an email with any handouts that we have. And of course, if you have any questions, you're always free to reach out to any one of us, really. And we will do our best to answer your questions or get you to the resources you need. So I hope can everybody see? I
Great.
hope. On the Zoom, can I get a thumbs up, perhaps?
I think you can make the screen larger. I'm looking for the button that you should hit.
Yeah, that's, if anybody is better at PowerPoint or Zoom, please by any means speak up. I am not a Zoom expert. Let's see if we
I
can,
mean, it's good what you got, but there
display
should be.
settings. How about this?
Oh,
Zoom?
oh.
There you go. Perfect.
Okay, well, the Zoom gets a really good view. Are you guys, should I switch this, do you think, Julie?
Make that,
Oh, there we are. I didn't know I could do that. And display. Duplicate. Hey, there we go.
It's right.
Can you guys on Zoom see?
Yep.
Awesome. We all learned something new today, so I hope everybody was taking notes. Yeah, don't touch too hard. So we'll do some introductions really quick. People on Zoom, can you see? Okay-ish. Main point is the slides. Yes. Can you guys hear me if I'm standing over here on
A
Zoom?
little muted.
Muted?
Yeah.
A
So
little muted.
I don't
Talk
know where
louder
yeah,
or
that's good.
stand closer. Those are our options. But
Yeah, so
in the
everybody's
room
gonna
see?
have to get near that.
Okay, good. How about now? Can you hear me?
Very good.
Okay, good. Thank you guys for bearing with me. I'm Olivia Larson. I am the forestry outreach coordinator for Maine woodland owners. So my focus is on forestry and outreach, but more importantly, cost share and resources for landowners and helping them find the right resources in order to achieve their goals and objectives. We also have Autumn Randall, our wildlife biologist, here today.
Hi.
We also have Julie Davenport, and we have Chad, and remind me again, please, Sam from MNAP, and they're going to be talking about invasive species. The main point and reason we're here today is looking at land use history and things like that. I forgot we had a pointer. So again, that's basically who we are. Maine Woodland Owners, if you guys are not already members, is a member-based organization in Maine. Our goal is education, outreach, and advocacy for Maine's small woodland owners. And that's anywhere from half an acre all the way up to however many umpteen acres you might be able to acquire, which is great because we're here for you. So if you're not a member, I highly encourage you to become a member. It's only $50 a month or $50 for the year. Sorry, not a month, not a month. And you get access to us, our newsletter, and anything and everything in between. I don't usually do our membership spiel, so I might have missed something, Autumn.
I think you've covered most of it, if not all of it.
Okay, perfect. So some of the stuff we might talk about might be a little redundant, or you might already know a lot about it, but the whole point is to, learn something new. And I'm sure there's something that everybody can take away today, even if it's just, okay, now I know where to go if I have a question about this, or now I know what to do if I encounter this scenario and things like that. Or, hey, now I know that my neighbor is facing this same challenge. Maybe we can work together because teamwork makes the dream work and accomplish our goals together, right? So obviously we are all aware that Maine is 90% forested. It's 94% privately owned. Obviously, the northern part of the state has the more industrial landowners, and the southern part of the state has more smaller landowners, land trusts, and things like that. And that means that the land use management there's not one central way that everybody is organizing everything or making decisions and managing their land. Everything is different. And with all of these little patchwork parcels, it's important to understand the history of that land and how that influences how you can manage it at the same time. I'm going to let Julie and Chad and Autumn kind of talk a little bit about themselves really quick, just so we can all introduce ourselves and kind of get a little more familiar.
Those folks.
Yeah.
Slides will burn into it. All right, I'm gonna do next.
Okay.
Guess I
Backward.
go first. All right. Well, I'm Autumn. I'm the wildlife biologist that works with Maine Woodland Owners. My position is a partner position with NRCS as well as IFNW. I'm still a little new. I'm still kind of learning the way that it all works out. But if you have any specific questions, if I can't answer them, I will be able to point you in the right direction and also do some digging myself to try to learn and help you guys out. Julie, Olivia, and I have been working on the Woodland Owner Learning Lab for a hot minute now. Julie brought it to us back in like November, December time. This is supposed to be geared towards specifically the Androscoggin area. It is a focus area deemed this way by IFNW. This is an area that they believe has a lot of critical habitat here from not only the fens that are in the area, but everything in between from marshes and the woodlots themselves. So what you're getting today and also in this 4-week series, which is every Thursday from now until April 30th from 2 to 4, just a little bit more on how you guys can help. So this week, I have a little flyer so I don't mess anything up. But this week, we're going to be talking about the ecological and human history. We're also going to be talking about land use change over time, which is what Olivia will be talking about. We're going to maybe cover a little bit of the ecosystems themselves this week, as well as covering invasive species and management for those. Next week, we'll have IFNW here. I believe Kelly will at least be here, Kelly McNutt, but Joe might also be here as well. They'll be talking about the species of greatest conservation need in this area with a heavy focus on the Androscoggin Lake and Androscoggin Basin. The week after will be more cost share programs, very management oriented. This will be NRCS, this will be WoodsWise and things like that. We'll help you guys touch base with the professionals that you might want to talk to, especially when you want to go through this process. And then the last week, we'll have a woodlot tour. We're going to be using the Curtis Homestead, which is like 5 minutes from here. It's owned by the Kennebec Land Trust, and they're letting us kind of do a little tour. Sally from Audubon will be there, and she'll be talking about how you can kind of see the woods through the lens of wildlife, specifically birds. But yeah, I hope you enjoy. Who wants to go next? Absolutely. Come right on up.
Or you can stand there. It's up to you, whichever you prefer. It's a small
Thank
group.
you. Yeah. All right. So my name is Sam Floyd. I'm an invasive plant technician with the Maine Natural Areas Program.
But can they hear you on Zoom?
Yeah, you got the camera. All right. I'll do it on the camera. I'll tell you. Okay. My name is Sam Foy. I'm an invasive plant technician with the Natural Areas Program. I started just about a year ago this month. And I'm super excited to talk to you guys about invasive plants.
How's it going? My name's Chad Hammer. I'm the invasive plant biologist with the Maine Natural Areas Program.
Perfect. Okay, I keep hitting the wrong button on the.
Talk about bugs.
Oof. All right. Did I? Yep. I'm gonna give this to you. I'm gonna move this camera off to the side so our presenters don't get blinded. Zoom people, can you see appropriately? Can I get a thumbs up or a Jen is
All right,
thumbs up?
cool.
Okay.
All right, so my name is Julie Davenport. I'm gonna do kind of the first section, but I just wanted to start with a little overview of kind of who I am, who I work with, and what I do. So I'm a district forester. I work with the Maine Forest Service. To those of you in the room or online that are from right here in Leeds, hey neighbor, I live here too. But a little bit about what I do as a district forester again in the Maine Forest Service. So we're part of the Department of Agriculture, Conservation and Forestry. Maine Forest Service is one bureau within that. That also includes geology, parks and lands, land use planning commission. But within the Maine Forest Service, we have three kind of divisions, if you will. I work for this middle one, forest policy and management, along with 11 other district foresters across the state who do what I do. We also have the forest protection division. That's where the rangers live. So they deal with all of the fire prevention stuff, and they're also actually law enforcement officers. So they do enforcement of certain rules and statutes and things that govern what goes on in the woods. And then our third division is forest health and monitoring. They have field staff all over the state who do the monitoring part, where they are doing inventory plots for general forest information, but also lots of surveys for different insects and disease affecting these forests. They also have a pretty involved and well-equipped lab in Augusta where the state forest entomologists and pathologists work out of. So if you ever have questions about something that's ailing your tree or something that's wrong with your forest, there's a whole group of folks who can help you. And for those in the room, there's actually contact cards for the insect and disease lab on the back table if you're interested in taking on any of those. Oh no, there's a bunch of arrows. Bear with me. Whoa. All right, here we go. So what is a district forester anyway? I get asked that a lot by people I work with and people that I know in my regular life. But essentially, in a nutshell, at the bare minimum, I'm a licensed forester. So I'm legally able to do all of the normal forestry practices you would think of, like logging and writing management plans and signing off on things. I don't do that in my capacity as a district forester, and that is by design. The reason for that is that by having nothing to gain financially by whether folks do or don't follow my recommendations on their land, I'm able to give unbiased management recommendations. So kind of the bread and butter of what I do is in my work area, which if you can see the map is kind of this long, skinny coral colored bit. It's a little bit fuzzy, so I apologize if you can't read the names real well, but my work area covers all of Franklin County and everything in Kennebec County that's west of the river. And then I have a little annex that includes Leeds, Livermore, and Livermore Falls because you have to live where you work. So I was able to get a little bit of extra help so that I could get the job and still live where I live. But what I'm saying is the kind of bread and butter of what we do is what we refer to as a walk and talk. That would be one of the services for landowners. So services that are available to you as a landowner, first thing on the list is a walk and talk. And what that means is me as a licensed forester, I can come out on your property, walk with you. We can look at your woods in real time, talk about what's there, talk about what your goals are and how or what management decisions you might make or consider to better get to those goals. If that's planning a harvest or just having a management plan prepared that kind of reflects what you feel strongly about, whether that's wildlife or timber management, any number of those things. I'm able to help you with that. Then we kind of part ways. I'm always there to answer questions and help with things into the future, but I can help put you in contact with a licensed forester in the area who can do the next steps, like writing a plan or overseeing a harvest. Again, I am licensed to do those things. I just don't do them in this capacity. Had people assume that I'm not a real forester before, so I tried to really drive that home. Some of the other services that are available through the Maine Forest Service to landowners in the state of Maine are different programs for cost sharing or on both activities or practices in the woods, and also for management plans. We kind of oversee some of those. Most of that is US Forest Service dollars, but the grants are administered at the state level. I'm not going to get too far into that, but that's something we'll talk about more in week 3. Or you could reach out to me. I've got business cards in the back and my contact information is all over the internet. One of the big things, I think I had it on the other slide, but one of the big things that a district forester is an actual name and a phone number that you can get online. A lot of state agencies, you get kind of a random number that takes you to a main office, and eventually you might be able to get in touch with somebody. If you type my name in on Google, you're going to get my phone number, and if you call it, it's going to ring, and realistically, I might not pick it up, but I will get back to you. So I also do a lot of in-person events and presentations, kind of like this, anything related to trees and forests. I'm hopefully involved with it. I do work in schools, so I do stuff with kids and teachers. And then also anything with tree health. If you've got a tree in your yard or in your woods that doesn't look so good, I can help. If I don't know what it is, I can help get you in touch with the lab. And then kind of the less fun part of what I do is I do have a regulatory aspect to my job. I'm not a law enforcement officer like the forest rangers. Kind of our division, I like to say, is between stuff that's regulatory and stuff that's actually law. So I deal with things like water quality and clear cutting standards, whereas the rangers are dealing with things like timber theft or illegal dumping. That's kind of where we break that. Our focus as DFs is education first. So when we do meet with loggers, if they're breaking a rule or having a tough time, if we can get them on track, get them educated so it doesn't happen again, that's the first step. If it does progress from there, we do have channels where we, can make it hurt a little bit more each time until they get the point. So that's just some of the things that we do at the Maine Forest Service. There's too many things to list, but I don't want to take all the air out of the room on that. So without further ado, I'm going to talk just a little bit about some land use history. This is kind of a brief overview, but kind of one of the building blocks to have this discussion, I think, is just to revisit a couple basic concepts. So forest succession is a really key one to talk about. That's basically just how woody vegetation or vegetation at all grows over time. Usually you start somewhere with some kind of disturbance that gives you bare land. Over time, grasses grow in, that kind of turns to shrubs, things get bigger with time. You end up with shade intolerant pioneer species, think things like birch, cherry, aspen, or popple. Over time, that gives way to a slightly different species composition, and then kind of towards the end, you end up with these quote unquote climax forests of shade tolerant species. That's kind of, if you were going to categorize old growth, you'd stick it in there. We don't have a lot of that in Maine just because of the history of management that we've had here, which I'm about to get into. But just again, these kind of key concepts that help us understand what has happened in the last several hundred years in this area. So types of disturbance, these are the things that kind of precipitate that succession chain starting out. The most common ones in this area are things like pasture and agriculture. We don't have as much fire here, but other things that can create disturbance in the forest would be like any kind of forest health issue, wind events, heavy flooding can lead to a lot of blowdown, things like that, microburst storms, and then beavers is another one that a lot of times people don't necessarily think of right away. But kind of want to start with this slide. I mentioned before, I'm mostly going to be talking about what's happened in the last, 300 or 400 years. But there's been people on this landscape a lot longer than that. I'm currently working to try to self-educate myself on what Native people were doing here, but before European colonization, but that is a pretty key part of like people on this landscape and what interactions they've had with our forests that we have today and that we had in the past. So a couple things have changed over time. The landscape here looked very, very different before the glaciers. The glaciers covered pretty much the entire state of Maine over time, and shaped a lot of what we see on the landscape today. This picture kind of here over here on the bottom is actually part of the Harvard Forest dioramas, which was a project done at Harvard, where they made these dioramas of essentially a single area over time. So this was what pre-settlement forests probably would have looked like. And by settlement, I mean European settlement. So a lot of different ages, a lot of different age classes. If we had true old growth, this is what it would look like. Again, there's very few areas in Maine that actually truly meet the definition of old growth, but that's kind of what it would have been like. So after folks started to get here from Europe and start to make it their home, manipulate the land, we saw huge changes. Maine and New England were almost completely forested. That changed fairly rapidly in the scheme of things. One man with an axe and an ox could clear about 3 acres in a summer. And they got really busy because Maine is currently 90% forested. By the mid-1800s, so much land had been cleared that it was almost, I believe in this area, statewide, it was a little bit different, but in this area, it was almost the inverse. So areas that were popular for agriculture, like where we are right now, was closer to 90% not forested. Some other things that were happening on the landscape that I think are interesting to note. In that top picture, there's an aerial photo. It's a little bit hard to see, I think, in the room. Hopefully it's a little bit more clear on Zoom. But this is actually Bog Brook here in Leeds. So this is from right at the outlet of Androscoggin Lake. And like if you were to visualize it, Bishop Hill Road is actually just off the screen right here. Curtis Corner is over here. But this area right here, you can notice the stream looks kind of almost unnaturally straight. It does have kind of a zigzag pattern, but it's been manually straightened. And that was another thing that was being done by people who were using the land for agriculture. They would straighten the stream not only for just so that it was easier for them from a land use perspective, but they also would flood the streams in the spring as a sort of springtime irrigation. Once you move downstream a little bit into here, you can see the stream has a lot more of those natural curves and kind of meanders. That's an area where it wasn't straightened. So it's kind of a neat contrast to see. We certainly aren't doing that anymore. This is very illegal to do today, so don't do that. But this was something that was going on, just more manipulation by people who lived here. A lot of things were driving the deforestation of the time. Part of it was everyone had their own little subsistence farm where they had to do everything that they were going to grow and use pretty much came from their own property. And that included growing flax to go through the very laborious process of turning into linen for clothing and bed linens and all that kind of thing. So kind of lends itself well to the cleared land, but it's hard to talk about land use history without mentioning the white pine. I could do an entire presentation on just this, but I'm going to hold myself back on that. White pine kind of put New England on the map. It was really well suited at the time for ship's masts. It turned into a whole big thing because the king in England wanted all of the nice pines for himself. That's how we ended up with this. If you might recognize the King's Arrow, there were surveyors who went through and marked the best of the white pines as masts to be shipped out to England. At the time, we were pretty much the only place in the world that had trees of this quality and this size that could be used for ship's masts. So there was a lot of demand for it. There's actually a lot of evidence to support that Maine's white pine was one of the biggest drivers of the US Revolution. So again, I'm not going to go down that road because it's not why we're here today, but it's hard not to mention it. The other big thing that led to a lot of clearing was this sheep craze that we had in the early 1800s. Previously, the merino sheep was only allowed to be in Spain, but suddenly this fellow, William Jarvis from Vermont, smuggled about 400 of them into the United States. And that led to what is affectionately known as sheep fever, where everyone who could have sheep wanted to have sheep. Our stream system in New England lended itself really well to small mills to produce textiles from this fiber that everyone in the world wanted that previously they could only get from Spain. So that was another thing that led to lots of land being cleared. Most people who had land with pasture had sheep on it. And if any of you have ever raised sheep before, you know they're incredibly hard on the land. So we ended up with a lot of erosion, things changed. We started to get these big waves of land abandonment. There were two big ones that I'm going to kind of talk about, but not in too much detail because it's not why I'm here today. I do have an entire separate presentation on this, so I'm trying to pull the reins back a little bit. But some of the big things that led to land abandonment in New England were people started going west, and what they found was that it's not a huge rock pile out west like it is here. So a lot of folks went out for the Civil War to fight for the cause, and when they were there, they said, "Where's all the rocks?" And so some of them stayed there, some of them sent for their families, some of them came back and told their families, and their families said, "Why are we here?" So a lot of people went west. The Erie Canal was built, which made people able to get further out west. And we saw a lot of industrial revolution happening. So there was kind of a shift to more town-focused operation. It was a little bit less of everyone for themselves on these subsistence farms. We started seeing people gathering in kind of city areas. In 1840, Maine's population was at its highest as it was in a long time. It dropped so far down when everyone moved west that the population didn't hit that number again until 1990. So it was a lot of people who left. But there was a handful of things that led to that. And then part of what happened with the war is that people didn't make it back, unfortunately. But I like to think that those of us who stuck around and stayed in Maine and kept farming rocks, that's part of why we're so tenacious. We're just a stubborn group. So what was happening on the landscape as a result of all of this is, for the most part, as you might imagine, based on how I kind of hopefully set the stage, a lot of the worst land was what was abandoned. People who were having the hardest time were the most willing to get out of Dodge and go try again somewhere else. So a lot of the forests started to grow back. Again, these photos are from the Harvard Forest Dioramas. I never say those three words in sequence. I actually have the book from the dioramas here in the back. If during the break anybody wants to take a look at it, they're welcome to do so. These pictures are also all online. But what we saw is in a lot of these abandoned fields, we started to have mostly pine forests growing back. Part of that was there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that there was a lot of sun, the opposite of that. There was a lot of sun, and pine is a sun-loving tree. A lot of the soils where these pines got established had been previously managed and sometimes cultivated, so they were nice and well scarified, which is another thing pine really likes to get established. And then in addition to that, as these forests were regenerating, a lot of the hardwood was a lot more desirable browse for animals and other critters in the area, so they got kind of mowed down, and the pine is really what had a chance to grow back. If you fast forward a little bit more, like looking up in here, well, actually, no, right here. So in the early 1900s, that pine kind of hit merchantable size, and there was a lot of demand for wood at that time. So in mass, a lot of it was cut. The forest management styles then were a little different than they are now. It was a lot of clear cutting here. So most of that pine fell, and a lot of what grew in behind it was a shift to more shade intolerant pioneer species, kind of like what we talked about with that the succession page. So we had a big shift. Some people will consider the initial pre-colonized forest as kind of the first wave of Maine's forests. This was the second wave, this first wave of land abandonment, these new forests. And then what we're in now and what started in the early 1900s is this kind of hardwood dominated stage 3 forest. Because management styles changed a little bit over time, things weren't cut quite so all at once, if you will. Starting in like the end of the 30s, we kind of got a different management style, and that's kind of why the forests we have now are the same ones. Sorry, I'm a little bit distracted. I'm having a hard time talking. So that's kind of what led to the forest that we have today. This was the base. We've been managing them a little bit more. piecemeal than what we were doing before, and that's why we're kind of in this stage 3 forest.
Julie, will you, are you able to take questions?
I'm not quite done yet, but I
Okay.
will.
Okay, great.
Yes, we will save time for questions at the end of each presentation, just so we can make sure we're getting through all of our.
I've got 2 slides left. This is not working.
Oh no. That's okay. We're gonna figure it out. Oh no, there we
Okay,
go.
here we go. So the second wave of land abandonment, I'm almost done. I've only got 2 slides left. Was kind of brought on, but it was not nearly as big or monumental as the first land abandonment wave. It was kind of happening over time since the mid 1800s, but big one happened in notable enough to talk about anyway in the 1940s. And a couple things drove that. One was World War II, but some of the things that came out of that time period were things like refrigeration and this shift to bottling plants. So these kind of things went hand in hand. A lot of what you had kind of in between the first wave of land abandonment, that shift away from subsistence farming to more market farming. We had people kind of abandoning their land, and then some people with the better land were able to kind of up the scale of their farming practices, supplying their own communities with products, especially dairy. But what happened when refrigeration came on board, especially refrigerated transport, is that we had a shift to these kind of bottling plants. So we had kind of central hubs that processed a lot of things and then shipped them out to broader areas. This kind of brought the fall of the small local farms that supplied all of those products for the local community. And that led to additional abandonment of land. It was just, you could have bigger and fewer farms rather than small ones all over. So that was kind of another big one. And again, at this time, our population was still nowhere near what it was in the mid 1800s, just to give perspective, but
Is it working?
that's it.
What's going on?
And so that, we get our slide.
There we go.
Oh, okay. Well,
that
the
the wrong
last
one?
slide didn't show up, I guess.
Oh no.
Okay. So what I was gonna say is that brings us to today's forest, and that it was a picture of like a bunch of things related to today's forest. But kind of where are we today? We have forests, as Olivia noted in the top of the presentation. Maine is currently close to 90% forested. It's heavily privately owned. Our forests supply us with a lot of things. They give us opportunities for industry as far as the forest products industry is concerned, but also the recreation industry hinges hugely on Maine's forests. Maine's forests support a lot of the clean water that we have access to that again further supports recreation, but also supports a lot of different wildlife needs. There's been a lot of different management and goals and objectives in land ownership over the last 100 or so years, and that's kind of driven the diversity that we have in our forests now. Our landscape of forests here is a lot more of a mosaic from what it used to be. And I think that's great. That meets a lot of needs for a lot of different things. But it's not without its challenges. So Maine's forests aren't necessarily like safe forever, but they are dealing with a couple different things. We're going to talk a little bit about some of those today and then into the future of the next couple programs that we have lined up. But things like invasive plants, invasive insects, disease, climate change. As the environment changes, it's a stress on our forests. But another big one being kind of back where we started, deforestation. So the best thing that we can do to protect our forests is have our forests. So keeping them from getting developed or turned into other things is probably, if there's anything you can do to help forests, that's probably the best one. But I think that's it for me.
Does anyone online have any questions? I know I saw one in the chat that was talking about the population, but I think it might have been answered.
Okay.
I have a quick question. It's Bert.
Yep.
Immediately after the Revolution, and Maine was basically Massachusetts. Who owned the vast tracts of land that used to have the king's marks on the trees? Was it the state, or was it already predominantly privately owned?
Good question. So before the revolution, it was all owned by, basically what was happening is when people were settling this area, the land existed and the crown or the king was granting large tracts of land to these people who happened to come out here. In some cases, those landowners continued to own the land. So in some ways, they're kind of private. They were, I'm not sure that the king or the crown necessarily had the rights to grant the ownership to these people who owned it in large amounts, but that did tend to hold over even past the revolution. So the people who owned it and were dealing with it at the time kind of continued to after the revolution. And then over time, it got kind of, in some places, it got split up and subdivided and smaller and smaller and smaller lots were bought and sold. But so for the most part, it didn't necessarily change hands in a big way post-revolution. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions in the room? Side note, if anybody needs the restroom in the
yeah.
physical building, it is through that exit door to your right, and then immediately the first door on your left. It's an all gender restroom. So there's facilities for everybody.
I'll give you this, but I don't know if it'll help.
Let's see if we can. So some of the stuff I'll touch on are definitely things that Julie has talked about. But we are a team and we work together. So yeah, let's try that. Yeah, does everybody like that? Okay. Yeah, that would be helpful. Thank you. I made notes because I'm not as good at remembering things as Julie is. She's very good at it. So my focus is a little bit more on like how this land has changed or what that change looks like physically on this land. So why does this matter to begin with? Why does it matter that we know who was here before us? Why does it matter that we know what they were doing or how they were doing things? Well, it's important because those who forget history are doomed to repeat it, right? I don't remember who said that. Probably a president. So is anybody familiar with the watershed area to begin with? Let me ask that. Everybody kind of familiar? Yeah, a little bit. Yes and no. Great news. I also am learning about watersheds. Yay. So the Androscoggin Lake, this is this tiny little lake area right here is only within, this is only a 30-mile square area, right? Doesn't seem like it's that big, and you're like, why would anything here matter? Why would it matter if I accidentally dump some trash right over here when it's like, that far away from the water? Well, guess what? This 30 square mile area is actually part of a 60 square mile area. So anything we do here, down here, impacts everything we do up here. Everything we do has an impact whether we see it or not, right? So the lake itself is about 4,000 acres in size, which when I first read that, I was like, that seems like it's a pretty big lake. That seems very significant. But the average depth is only about 4 meters, which I was very surprised about. I didn't realize how, not necessarily shallow, but not deep that it was for the size that it is, right? You would expect the lake this big to be deeper than that, I guess, or at least I would. But again, I am not from here, right? So it was a neat thing to learn. But that shallow depth is critical for all of these species that find this area home. They're all adapted to this area, to this watershed, to this lake, right? So the shallow lake is going to respond a lot different than a deep lake. So the nutrient inputs are going to be a lot more dramatic. They're going to have a lot more changes. Temperature changes are going to affect things a lot more drastically. Runoff as well. It's not something we always think about, but everybody is living everywhere around here, right? I'm sure everybody could probably point to a spot and be like, yeah, I know exactly where that is. I might not be able to, but you guys probably can. So dumping your trash here is going to cause a problem over here. But I'm sure none of you guys dump trash. You guys are great. So we can go to the next slide, please. If it'll work for us. So this is actually a web page that you guys can go to. I just took a screenshot because I thought it was really cool. This dial is actually interactive, so you can click on either one of these categories that they use to gauge lake health with, and you can learn about what is the issue with water quality, invasive plants, how vulnerable is Androscoggin Lake area or the shoreland and the habitat. Because surprise, surprise, the lake is vulnerable. To what, you may ask? I don't want to say everything, but it's 2026, so everything. So because it's in this 30-mile rivershed, the direct watershed is about 23 miles. So again, that previous map where we saw just the Androscoggin Lake area, that's the direct watershed that we're kind of talking about. So the diagram is summarizing obviously the current condition, but the scale, as I'm sure you can tell, kind of down here, blue is good. So just these three categories in water quality out of this entire circle is good. We don't want that. We want the whole circle to be good. We want to have good water quality. We want to have good shoreline and habitat. All of those things we want to be good. So what is causing those issues? What are the things that are, I guess, feeding into the lake area's inability to maintain good quality? Nutrient inputs, temperature changes like we talked about that relate to climate change, as well as invasive plants. That's a really big one. But overall, the lake is fair to poor or at-risk quality, which nobody wants that. We want to be able to go outside and enjoy things. But also the things that we do impact the lake's ability to resist any stresses that we put onto it. We can go to the next slide.
Can do.
Yes. So Julie already kind of talked about this. There were people here before us, and what they were doing before us is going to be different than what we are doing now. They didn't have the technologies or the advancements that we have, and the way that they viewed the land and the landscape and how they interact with it is completely different than the way a lot of people today were brought up to and taught to appreciate land. You know, I wasn't taught that we are connected to trees and the dirt, and everything is a full circle, and the colors of the wind are a thing. No, I was taught trees, they're good for paper. That's it. And that's not really a great way to, view our landscape if we actually care about it. So before this European settlement, Julie already talked about it, there were Native Americans here, who were already doing several different types of, I guess, landscape engineering to an extent. They're changing the landscape just like we changed the landscape, but the extent at which they were doing it and the way they were doing it is very different. We have mechanized machines that can compact the soil far more than like a herd of a handful of horses or Native Americans who are just trying to grow some corn. So we can go to that's not a touch screen. So 1600s, obviously Native Americans were here before that. And then we had European establishment coming in, doing these trading posts and things like that. Things would fail, populations grow, populations crash and things like that. Like Julie said, people left for the Revolutionary War. And when they saw that, you know what, there's far less rocks and it's way easier to farm down south than out west. So they left. And then people were like, you know what, there's too many people out here. We're going to go back. So some people obviously came back. We can go to the next slide. But the important thing to note was the forest landscape back then was going to be a little more natural as opposed to today. Not that today isn't natural, but when you think about how the forest back then, there was pine, there was spruce and hemlock and hardwood species. And now we have trees coming back up on abandoned ag sites. And a lot of times it's going to be those pioneer species, which then lead into a lot of times white pine. Not necessarily everywhere, but a lot of times. So this map is a 1964 aerial image of the Androscoggin Lake area. I tried to find the other half of this over here by Wayne. It was very difficult to find and not easy to get on there so that you guys could all see. But what I'd like to point out here that you may or may not be able to see these gray areas here. So there's one there, all over the place. Those are areas that people have cleared for some activity. I can't attest to which specific activities, but those are areas that people have cleared forest for something. And that was just 1964. So when I look at that in my head, I'm like, oh, that's a lot of empty space. It's not super fun to look at, right? Sorry, my notes got all mixed up. We can go to the next one. So by the time we get back to today, we're up to 90% forested. So this is a land change map. So what we're looking at basically is from the time of 1999, I believe, is that what I put on my paper?
I think so.
It's a 20-year landscape change map. So
1999 to
Yeah.
2025.
it's hard to get all of the aerial imagery you need from like 1964 that can work with ArcPro and the mapping software and things like that. But this is just a 20-year change. So what we're looking at, these red areas right here, like I pointed out before, fields where people have, there's no trees there. There's no trees there. This area right here, wetland. But what we're seeing, red is very high vegetation loss, right? Very high. High vegetation loss, moderate vegetation loss, slight vegetation loss, right? Loss. There's not a whole lot of gain there. And that is kind of scary to see, right? And a lot of that has to do with, again, runoff, climate change, or what is the more politically correct term? I don't know if there is one. But the changing climate is in fact impacting obviously our forest resilience, and that's an issue. It's also allowing invasive species a lot more access to areas and resources that they not necessarily would have had beforehand, which is scary. It's kind of sad to see. So one of the biggest impacts is stormwater runoff, development in areas, and invasive species. Those are the three things that, and obviously landscape fragmentation. But those were some of the big things that I was able to see when I did this NDVI map, which is looking at the vegetation loss over time. And again, that's only 20, 25 years of loss. So if we were to look at it over 100 to 150 years, it would be, obviously there would be ups and downs.
Sorry, that's me.
Okay,
Can you really quickly
Yeah.
explain that chart? 'Cause
this right here.
it's too far to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So this chart correlates to this map key. And so what this is telling us is the amount of vegetation loss that was very high. It's also blurry for me on this screen. So about 754 acres that had very high vegetation loss. Yep, and in the orange, that is 1.4 or 14. Oh no. Sorry, everybody. 1,400 acres of vegetation loss. This gold orange color right here, the moderate vegetation loss, that's going to be about 980 acres. The yellow color is 63 acres. The gray area, which is no change, is going to be about 371. Sorry, this yellow is 630. The light green is 217. The medium green is 171, and the dark green, which is high vegetation gain, is going to be 69 acres. Does anybody online have any questions while I'm taking a moment?
Yeah, I have a quick question about Androscoggin Lake. It's Bert. So is this a historically natural lake, a post-glacial residual lake, or was this a dammed stream that at some point became the shallow lake?
This was a glacial lake, right, Julie?
I believe so.
Yeah.
A sunken lake, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep, so this one wasn't dammed. I see one in the chat. Let me just check that really quick.
Some of it.
The general vegetation type that was lost, so around the, can you close that chat really quick? One moment. So around the lake, straight up through here, this is going to be wetland types. And then the areas outside of that are going to be related wetland types and forested, lightly forested, is kind of how I categorized it in ArcPro. So I tried to keep it basic so as to not overload the system with too much data. So anything that is close to the water is going to be wetland types. And then further away in the red is forested and wooded, if that kind of makes sense. Does that answer your question? Double check. Yep.
So
And the area that you're looking at, is that because that's the focus area?
Yes.
So that's where you need to
Yep.
look at the
So yeah, and I
shore.
highlighted this area specifically because our focus today was on the Androscoggin focus area. I could make a larger map, but it takes time and it's a little difficult, but I just wanted to highlight this Androscoggin Lake area because that's what we were talking about today.
So the dark red is severely deforested.
Yeah, vegetation loss, yep. Yep, so this
Wetland
area right here is
vegetation.
actually a wetland area. If I were to take this red orange mess off, this is actually a wetland area right here.
And
And
that's
then-
actually around Bog Brook, which is that
Yep.
brook that was,
Can you say what you mean by wetland vegetation?
There's different types of wetlands. So there's fens, there's bogs, there's scrubs, marshes. There's
Okay.
emergent wetland. So when I was building this map, actually, what I used was the beginning with habitat GIS layers. And when I put that into Arc Pro and had it categorize the different land use types or the different vegetation types, what I had to do was boil it down to just simple wetland types and then simple forested types to kind of just keep it a little more easy for the data to understand or for the data to kind of compute, if that makes sense. Because when I put it in the first time, it was telling me there were 6 different wetland types just in this square inch area. And I was like, it's a little dense for right now. I think we need to focus on the larger picture, I guess, if that makes sense.
I have a little tidbit I can add to this.
Yes.
So the focus area is also, it encompasses Curtis Homestead, which if you were to go there and you were to walk, you will actually have access to see an unpatterned fen. So this is a type of wetland that is a little bit more alkaline, a little bit more base. And it itself has, I believe it has a mineral stream that goes through it that allows it to get the nutrients that it needs. So compared to a bog is a little bit more acidic. Your swamps are a little bit more shallower and they have woody species. And then marshes, I think, are a little bit more sedges. So that's where your cattails are, your large long grasses that you see birds sitting on. This is an area that has a couple different ones, but the fen, I believe, is the biggest one in this area besides Androscoggin Lake itself.
So that red area is down by the bog?
I believe so. I think
This
it's,
area right here.
yeah, I think,
High red area?
yeah, I believe it's by the fen that's right there, the unpatterned fen. And if you, when we do our woodlot, trail walk, which will be on the 30th, you'll have some time afterwards to go check it out. And it's actually super cool. There's a ton of birds there right now. All our red-winged blackbirds have actually made their way back and are screaming.
It's
So,
very fun.
yeah, it's interesting to see all the different types of wildlife that are using those areas.
And so this is the focus area that IFNW has identified, but what the point we're trying to make is this tiny area right here, which may not seem tiny, feeds into a larger system that impacts other people and other areas. So the decisions, the management decisions we're making about whether or not we're using herbicides or fungicides or any type of chemical treatment on our woodlots or any type of management activity ends up impacting larger ecosystems. So it's just important to understand the impacts that not only previous people's decisions have made, like the indigenous people who were here before us, or our grandparents or ourselves. It's important to understand the impacts that our decisions are having on the physical landscape. Because we won't be able to look out for the land for ourselves or for the future if we have no idea what was going on, what is going on. Does that kind of make sense? Any other questions at this moment in time?
So
I do have a question.
Oh, yes, on Zoom.
Yep, on Zoom. I'm curious about the sort of greenest, the high vegetation gain and the moderate vegetation gain. Like I guess two questions. One is like, how is that happening in the midst of all this red? And then the second question is like, is it necessarily good? Like, are there kinds of vegetation gain that we don't want, I guess, is really maybe the question.
That's a good question. So this area right here is along the bog area that Julie pointed out. And an important thing that she mentioned was that that stream was straightened at one point in time. So that was a very common practice throughout a lot of the area, was just let's straighten this stream and make it what we need it to be for our purposes. So this vegetation gain has been from the bog actually doing its natural thing, you know, going back to its regular S pattern curves, making oxbows and things like that. And that allowed some of this vegetation to come back in a natural regenerative way. These red areas, they seem really scary and dangerous, and it's not the end of the world, but also it's not a great thing that we're experiencing some of this vegetation loss. And there's people who live here, right? There's people who have property in this area. So some of it has to do with agriculture. So maybe they were changing their fields or doing different crops and things like that. And some of it just has to do with people buying property and developing it. One of the biggest challenges in this area is actually landscape development, which leads into this fragmentation. So a lot of areas in this, like right here is a field, and over here is another field that somebody probably grew something in. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah,
I
it
hope.
does. Thank you. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, perfect. We had a question in the room.
Well, if you find a dump on your land from previous owners, God knows how long, but, what do you do? Dig it up or?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. I would like to confer to my constituents today.
I usually leave it, just.
Yeah.
It's probably not like an environmental concern.
Yeah.
I'm not sure to like dig it up and then take all of the pieces and throw them all. We distribute them or dig it up and then throw it in the lake. Don't do that, but.
Oh, well, no.
Yeah.
Depending on what is there.
Yeah.
You know, there's methods, chemicals or something like that, you can always, useful resources, USGS soil survey will actually find how the depth of your soil to for the water column. And things like that. So if you found some kind of chemical waste or something, you can see if the water table was.
We're having a hard time hearing the room.
Fishermen,
Yeah.
dirt, we moved some dirt around and I found trash and I'm like.
Olivia?
Yes.
We can't hear the room.
So we had a question in the room about what would you do if you found a dump site on your property? And Julie mentioned, well, it's probably not that big of an environmental concern unless you might have chemicals or something like that. And Chad talked about the USGS soil maps, which will tell you basically how deep your soil is, and it can tell you how close you are to the water table, right?
Yeah.
Yep. And that can help you make a better informed decision about whether you should maybe dig up all of that stuff or just kind of leave it a little bit. Any other questions on the Zoom?
You know, I think along the lines of dumps, probably the thing that's more important to know is how many conforming and non-conforming septic systems there are within the drainage of the lake.
Yep. That's a good point. Bert on Zoom, if you guys couldn't hear, said it's a good point to double check the septic systems in the area as well. See, like, where are these draining? How well are they built to begin with? But yeah, do we have a time? I want to make sure I'm giving Chad. Okay, perfect. I don't want to run over time, so let me see if I have one more slide. Okay, so we kind of have already gone into this, but why are we here? How is this important? We want to make sure that Androscoggin Lake is here for everybody to enjoy for now until forever, theoretically. But also, like, there's other reasons that this lake is important. Wildlife habitat and just natural ecosystem services. This lake, there's so many plants in it, it's doing photosynthesis. Who likes breathing clean air? I know I do. You know, who likes kayaking? I know I do. Who likes to look at loons? If you say you don't like loons, we're gonna have a problem. Yeah, right. And so that is why this is important. We don't want lakes filled with milfoil to the point that we can't even swim in them, that the loons can't even go out and swim and sing and do all the things that they do. So that kind of wraps up my portion. We're gonna take a 5-minute break really quick. So if anybody needs water or to use the bathroom, and then we're gonna get Chad's presentation queued up and we're gonna talk about invasive species. So those of you on Zoom, we will be back in 5 minutes. Steve.
Oh, great, huh? I didn't know that I was. Yeah, but I log it every once in a while. So. No, I don't care on it. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. 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 They're taking a break, so.
And I reminded her about those pillows. Yeah, right.
Okay, I think
Fucking brush up.
I'm hoping that works.
Oh, exactly. I was gonna say right now. Yeah, but.
I've never seen that before. We never had vines like that. Basic, you know, going up sides of trees, like half a foot. thick.
Isn't it? I'm assuming it's the edges of your property. Yeah.
Why this is not
But
working.
you, have a big traffic area, like, are you able to like walk by or birds or get it?
What happens if I take this out?
Sometimes birds will spread it. Sometimes other wildlife will spread it. too.
What the heck?
Traffic
But it was
area.
working if I click down here.
Oh, yeah?
I don't understand why it's doing this.
Okay.
There's people that go in without permission, that's probably. I've got people in there, and that's what they're doing there, and one guy cutting
Weird.
trees on
I'm
it.
gonna log into the Zoom on my phone
And I told him.
to double check the chat.
Oh, here, now it's working.
Yeah, but it's heavily posted.
Is it?
That's so the shot better. It wasn't posted.
Perfect, I got 4, 5, 6 times.
Yeah.
Then on the, come on across from one academy, there, what used to be academy, and that's all.
Okay.
And I didn't.
People
I just
still-
happened to read the bill.
Show up.
That's because.
But when I said I'm gonna have a restaurant, they seem to disappear.
Okay. Oh, you think this is,
So you're supposed to get permission for the rental.
you think this is screwed on?
Yeah.
Oh, here we go.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I have the cat pulled up. Is this working?
Was it a battery thing?
It sounds like it's like kicking, it's
It
like.
keeps kicking it back to
Do you think
not
it's like
present.
this? No,
Which one are you pushing?
We're using his.
that one.
Yeah, that should, I mean, that should do it.
Cause they never asked permission to put them on.
If you give them to the game warden, if they have like information on them, where they are.
Maybe it's my computer.
Computer's like this too.
Yeah, you plugged in every single port.
They're not gonna put information on them
Yeah,
unless they accidentally
Okay.
drop, something.
yeah, just be careful, they might have it might be a cellular game cam, so if you
Okay.
do it,
I just don't wanna get shot by them.
yeah,
Some of these people are dangerous people, and they carry
yeah.
knives, firearms. I come across a man who's. I thought he was,
Up and down, right?
Or somebody,
Do come across it. My recommendation.
Yeah.
I will stay here and
Okay.
Yeah.
do tech.
Okay.
Okay, people on Zoom, can you hear us okay?
That's right too, they are.
Yep.
So they can actually see what you.
Okay, perfect. We are gonna go ahead and get started with invasive species with Chad and Sam.
Okay, good to go? All right. All right, how's it going, everybody? Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, yeah, my name's Chad Hammer. I'm the invasive plant biologist with the Maine Natural Areas Program, and we're gonna be talking about invasive plants today. And these were great talks, kind of a perfect segue into our discussion here. So a lot of this is about the role of disturbance. So with this a great kind of conversation and presentation and yeah, lead up to this. Thinking about a lot of the invasive plants you see, a lot of them are because of this historic land use and the disturbance that has occurred here. And by disturbance, I just mean really that basically reduction of biomass. And how many invasive plants do you guys know? If you had to guess, just how many species would you know their name if you saw it, and maybe be able to identify it? 5?
6.
5 or 6? Okay, cool, awesome.
You see me all over the place now, at least I'm finding I've got, the red, the growing, the.
Yep,
prickly things
multiflora
on.
rose, yep.
Oh,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, and that makes total sense looking at that kind of vegetation change map, again, it's when we reduce the biomass, reduce that vegetation is when these plants come in.
You can't even walk through it.
Right, yeah, we're gonna talk a bit about all
One
that.
that finds around a tree where
Yes.
we live.
Yeah,
Yes.
bittersweet.
It's got, my husband always called them the Jesus Christ, vine, because that have thorns on it, and you can stab yourself pretty bad if you
Yeah.
don't have leather gloves on when you strip it down, so.
Oh,
Oh, no.
okay.
I don't know exactly what I mean, but
There we go.
Okay. What I actually might do is sit there. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, having some technical difficulties here. I think I'm just gonna sit down. Okay. All right. So yeah, the Maine Natural Areas Program, just kind of a quick introduction to what we do. We help facilitate the conservation of Maine's biodiversity. Thinking about all that data that beginning with Habitat kind of pulls in into their map viewers and things like that. A lot of that data is produced by my department. So we're kind of out there doing monitoring of exemplary natural communities and doing tracking rare plants and really classifying the different landscapes in Maine. But also, since invasive plants are such a threat to these natural areas, we also do a lot of invasive plant initiatives as well. And that's where that's what keeps my job security. So how we kind of do that, we typically take kind of four-pronged approach. And the first one being preventing early detection rapid response species from becoming widespread in the state of Maine. So every couple of years, we'll get a new invader, basically. So really trying to prevent their establishment in the state. We also do focus on widespread invasives that are kind of threatening kind of at-risk species and habitats and really kind of those exemplary natural communities. Most of those we do a lot of work on public lands. We track the status and trends of invasive plants in Maine and oversee the advisory list of invasive plants. And we also do a lot of education outreach as well. It's just another kind of objective that we have is identifying and assessing emerging threats. So kind of, again, kind of identifying those kind of incoming species and kind of evaluate their invasiveness to think about putting them on our lists. All right. So I just want to start with the definition of invasive plants in Maine. It's a bit different than some other states in the federal definition, and it's really descriptive on their behavior. So these are non-native species that can spread into minimally managed habitats that can cause economic or environmental harm by developing self-sustaining populations that become dominant and or disruptive to native species. And I just kind of color coded this a little bit to kind of break that down into the different chunks that are really important and kind of describe their behavior. So these are non-native species. So by definition, something like Virginia creeper or poison ivy, those are native species. So those are not invasive. A lot of people will say, oh yeah, Virginia creeper, I have this invasive plant, Virginia creeper or poison ivy. These are actually native species that are more, I refer to them as having invasive tendencies, so they're aggressive, but by definition, these are not invasive plants. So these are non-native species that can also, it's really important to consider or think about, is they're able to make large spatial jumps or spread into minimally managed habitats. And they need to make large spatial jumps to get there. And that could be, hitchhiking a ride on birds or, even in the digestive systems, hitching a ride on deer, moving around on machinery, hiking, many different ways, flowing water, but ultimately they're able to disperse long distances. And that's really important because a lot of plants might be able to spread really aggressively in your front yard from your garden, but it might not be considered an invasive plant in Maine if it doesn't have the mechanisms to make these large spatial jumps to natural areas. And then not only do they need to get to that natural area, but they also need to basically establish themselves. And not only that, but they need to thrive and then cause harm. So a couple different hurdles that these plants need to be able to get through to be called invasive. So in Maine, we actually do have 2 invasive plant lists, and this is really important to consider depending on your objectives. We have the do not sell list, which a lot of people are familiar with this one. So there's roughly 63 different species on this list, and this is a regulatory list. So these plants cannot be sold or traded. And that is overseen by the horticulture department. And these are all plants that are commonly in commerce. So again, kind of sold or traded. But Maine also has an advisory list of invasive plants that my department puts together and oversees. And this is a comprehensive list of threats in Maine. So regardless if they're found in commerce or not. So it's really important, depending on your objectives, to know about this list because there's about twice as many plants on it. So if you Google invasive plants in Maine, for example, you may end up with the do not sell list, but you might not be getting the whole picture. Those are only plants that are in commerce. And then you might have seen the invasive plant field guide, and that is just a subset of the most common advisory list of invasive plants.
How did they develop the advisory list?
So that is kind of, put together by my department, and it's kind of, it's kind of evaluating incoming plants, but also ones that are here. Yeah. And then just putting them through a very rigorous scientific evaluation to see if they can, if it's scientifically proven that they can actually do those different things, make those, can they disperse long distances? Can they compete in these natural areas? Do they cause harm? So it's really just a scientific process that we have a scientific advisory committee that will kind of really take a deep dive into the available science and literature on each individual plant. And then it needs to be proven without a doubt that they can do these things. And then that'll move forward to be put on the advisory list. So right now, for example, we're currently, starting the process to evaluate another 20 or 30 kind of emerging threats. All right, so a little bit about kind of nuts and bolts on why these plants are so successful. Well, they're highly competitive, so not only above ground, but also below ground. So a picture like the bottom right there, that's Japanese knotweed. And the biomass of that plant, for example, is 2/3 below ground. So it may look dense above ground, but There's also a ton of competition occurring below ground as well. Something called extended leaf phenology, which we're going to talk about more about that in a minute. And also the enemy release hypothesis, which basically states that kind of a theory that these plants have escaped their native ranges. So they've escaped their native predators and pathogens. I think Julie or Olivia mentioned that, these plants, they're referring to trees, but trees are constantly attacked by many different things, whether that's different insects, fungal pathogens, bacteria, and also even climate conditions like drought and things like that. But a lot of these invasive plants have actually escaped their native ranges, so they have no predators or pathogens. So it all comes down to evolutionary history. Everything that is attacking a tree has evolved with that species of tree. That species of fungus has evolved a million years with that tree, so it attacks that tree. Now, if you were to take that tree and put it on a different side of the world, fungus may not attack it. So everything is kind of evolved, has a strong evolutionary history. So these particular plants have escaped their native ranges, and they don't necessarily have many predators, pests, or pathogens. So not only are all these plants defending themselves all the time or being attacked, but they also have to spend energy for defense. They all have a suite of mechanisms that they're using to defend against these pathogens and insects and everything else. There's a lot of energy that goes into defending themselves. So invasive plants don't need to spend all that energy defending themselves. They can just put all of that energy into growth.
Yeah, these fences now, I got a fence around the cemetery that's been there 10, 20, 30 years, and these vines are coming and tearing the fence down.
Oh, yeah.
For that thing.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, hello.
Yeah.
Where did they come from?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Well, those ones came from Asia, but yeah. And then they're able to perform habitat alterations, so they can actually change the environment, like you all have probably noticed, to benefit themselves and negatively impact the native plants. Ultimately, they're very fast reproduction and resource use as well. So this is really important to kind of forest landowners. This is something extended leaf phenology. It really gives these plants an edge up on our natives, but ultimately this is a phenomenon that we use to explain how they can leaf out really early in the growing season. And then they hold their leaves really late in the fall. And that's actually more so the case in Maine here in northern kind of latitudes. It's so much that growing season is extended in the fall. But ultimately, there's a picture there in the bottom right where that's all honeysuckle, basically leafing out really early when all of our natives are typically sleeping. And that really allows them to kind of occupy that space before our natives are waking up. It's even been proven to increase deer abundance and deer pressure. So maybe providing a food resource when there's typically not much resources on the landscape, and then these deer are kind of doing better and having more offspring. And then those deer are kind of, once they do have natives to choose from, those increase in deer numbers are hitting the natives more vigorously in the growing season. Ultimately, this is a great time to think about invasive plants, and identify them, maybe flag them, and then maybe you can either treat them in the spring or fall. So depending on your management technique, if you already use herbicides, for example, in the fall is a great time to do that because our natives will be sleeping again, and then there's a lot less off-target damage. And it's actually a really effective time to treat invasive plants in the fall when they're kind of translocating all of their resources back down to the ground. But yeah, anyhow, fall and spring are a great time to think about invasive plants. Identify them, flag them, and then it's a great time to treat them.
Because you treat them, what type of pesticide or insecticides or herbicides, where do you go and find out the right thing to buy?
Yeah, there's a ton of, actually, Sam will talk a little bit about management later. And, yeah, we can go, talk about that for a while, but we're happy to hang out for a couple minutes after and kind of talk about management as well, if folks have specific questions. So how do these invasive plants spread? And this is something I would like everybody to kind of think about as well, the role of disturbance and land use. And also there may be a lot of invasive plants in the landscape, but really kind of preventing their spread to new areas, right? It may be kind of a tough situation in some areas, but we really want to prevent their spread to new areas. And that's where we can really make a difference. And when you think about land use, these plants are really jumping from disturbance to disturbance, and that's how they're getting to new areas, and that's why they're here. It's basically those initial deforestation events or agriculture events, clearing land. So all of these plants basically jumped to these disturbed areas. And then as we continue to create disturbance events in the landscape, they're just jumping from disturbance to disturbance. And the more we kind of deforest and the more folks move into wooded areas, the more these plants are going to just keep on moving. So it's really important to think about preventing and mitigating that spread. We're going to talk a lot about that today. So a lot of ways that they spread are through disturbance events, these disturbance events I speak of, these are not only natural disturbance like high flow events, floods, hurricanes, but also anthropogenic disturbance, so human disturbance. They spread through natural processes and also land use. So just kind of what that looks like. Again, we have those natural disturbance events. We have maybe a hurricane damage and some wind events and blowdowns, high flow events. So moving water is a big one. So that is from Hurricane Irene, kind of denuding those banks, and then kind of breaking off those knotweed stems and then moving them downstream will kind of land up on a bank somewhere else that are now scarified and denuded from this hurricane, and then they'll take over that area as well. And also just kind of evolved mechanisms, and wildlife are responsible for some of these too. So sorry, all wildlife's got to go. No, I'm only kidding. No, but a lot of these are hitchhikers. So again, kind of those high use areas, it's good to monitor them. So also how humans spread invasive plants. A lot of that is through industry and commerce, such as horticulture, so ornamental plantings, and not even intentional plantings, but also nursery hitchhikers. So a lot of our highest priority invasive plants that are spreading really quickly, Sam will talk about that later, are just seeds in nursery pots. People aren't even aware they're bringing these seed sources home, and they'll plant their nice new plant in their front yard, and then the next year they have this strange plant established, and if they don't recognize it, it'll start taking over their yard and kind of spilling up and down the roads. So really important to kind of monitor these areas and these events. These plants are moving around a lot through ATV recreation. And again, kind of that development and maintenance and those high flow events, culvert constructions, fill. So whenever you have fill coming into a new site. Again, just kind of being aware of these disturbance events and how these propagules can be introduced. So how this typically happens, kind of a neat little animation we've been working on. Super excited to do this right now. What this kind of look like, it's kind of a cartoon version, but a lot of the times invasive plant propagules are introduced through natural processes. And as you'll notice, these things also create open areas on the landscape. So natural processes, development and modifications, land use, and then disturbance events. And again, kind of creating these open areas, and then also often introducing new propagules to that open area. And then with time, these propagules will establish and then spread. And it's really important to think about if you have a seed source nearby these open areas. So kind of thinking about planning on your land. If you are to create a disturbance, for example, a timber harvest, it's really important to know if you have a seed source nearby, because if there is a seed source there and you create that disturbance, these plants will get a hold really quick. And then ultimately they're further spread throughout the landscape by these original processes. So kind of just some take homes here. Monitor disturbed areas and open areas, newly opened areas. Know where your seed sources are, especially if anticipating a disturbance. Be aware of these pathways and then mitigate these pathways of introduction and monitor these dispersal corridors. And a big one that we hear about in Maine that is really relevant to forest landowners is glossy buckthorn. Does anybody know this one?
What is it?
Mm-hmm.
This is
Yes, I do.
glossy buckthorn. Huge problem in Maine. So a lot of foresters, for example, in southern Maine, they'll harvest their forest and then they technically don't get a forest back. So Julie talked about succession. If you have a seed source nearby and you harvest a forest, those successional stages don't necessarily happen the way that we expect them to, or historically they did. They don't really function like that anymore if there's invasive plants around. So if you harvest a forest and you have a nearby mature glossy buckthorn that will drop 20,000 seeds in this stand, those successional stages don't necessarily happen. You'll get a stand of glossy buckthorn that will also have the ability to, exude volatile organic compound in the soil and prevent regeneration. But I won't get too much into that. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But anyhow, this is just a perfect example. We hear this. I get calls all the time from foresters saying, they harvested their forest and now they have thousands of glossy buckthorn seedlings in their forest and no regeneration. So it's the big one to be aware of. So how you do identify this? It is a shrub, a woody shrub. Has these alternately attached leaves that are often glossy. Now, if you're familiar with maybe a cherry or dogwood, actually the leaves are very similar in appearance to maybe a cherry or dogwood. That would be a native lookalike. But as you can see, these leaves kind of extend outward and then kind of turn towards that tip. Glossy buckthorn, the leaves are entire, so no margins, and then those blackberries. But you can see on the bottom right and the top right, yeah, that is basically a forest understory where that buckthorn kind of took off. And then next to that, you'll see those little seedlings, which are really important to identify at that stage. So if you have a situation like this, buckthorn, for example, can't produce seed until it's 3 years old. So it's really important to kind of find it early and then just remove it. So early detection, rapid response.
Hard roots pull out once it gets big.
Yeah, I mean, it's technically a small tree, so yeah, it is kind of deeply rooted for sure. Yeah. But, a lot of this identification stuff might be kind of, intimidating, but there's a ton of great resources out there to help you identify these plants in your woods. So, there's a lot of apps now. Seek by a naturalist. You just point your camera at it, and with that, maybe about 96% certainty, it'll tell you what it is. Native Plant Trust is a good resource. iNaturalist, and also that invasive plant field guide. We did bring some of those today. They're about $33 online, but at events, they're $20. We brought some of those if anybody is interested in those. And this is just kind of another kind of slide, kind of cartoon to show that kind of role of disturbance and why these plants do so well with these disturbances. So, all plants basically need to overcome these barriers to basically establish in a new site. So these are biological barriers, such as maybe they have limitations on dispersal. Maybe there's physical barriers there, like this building, for example, or a mall or an airport, even mountains and dense forests. These are physical barriers that plants just cannot penetrate. Or environmental barriers, such as maybe low light levels, inadequate soils. But ultimately, it's these disturbance events that really kind of just remove or break down these barriers and then kind of allow, open up that invasion pathway. So again, kind of bringing those propagules in and then creating an environment for them to thrive. So these plants love disturbance. So, the reason why they can thrive there is they're very proficient dispersals. Again, that's kind of embedded in their definition. That's why they're invasive. They have very abundant and fast reproduction. And they have very aggressive growth. And they also have a very high environmental tolerance and phenotypic plasticity, which basically means they can adapt very quickly, ultimately opportunistic. Okay. And then canopy gaps are also disturbances. So, disturbance, again, is not just, bringing in machinery, but also there's a lot of natural disturbances. And this is a disturbance. So this is basically a defoliation event from beech leaf disease. So we have that kind of defoliation going on, increasing resources of the forest floor. These trees are stressed, and then we'll have maybe a blowdown because of they're stressed. There's multiple stressors. So now we have two disturbances. We have this defoliation event, soil disturbance. Perfect opportunity. Invasive plants thrive in these situations, and we also again kind of have those wildlife bringing in those seeds to these interior forests. Fill. So this is just, I won't get too much in this, but monitor your fill piles. So we see this all the time. Long story short, I don't want to take up too much time. I got to save some time for Sam, but this is basically a situation where we have this kind of uncommon invasive plant. It's giant knotweed. It's kind of knotweed on steroids, and came in on fill, and then this developer is just spreading it all over town. So whenever you bring in material, make sure you monitor your fill piles.
Fine.
No, not in Maine. Yeah. Yeah.
Milfoil is though. Is it, if you bring that into the lake?
Yeah, for sure.
You could be fine for that.
Yeah, aquatics, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so a little bit about the impacts of invasive plants. So this is that bittersweet, this is that vine you were talking about. So these plants either they kill our native plants directly or indirectly. So again, directly through maybe strangulation, like bittersweet, that'll actually girdle that tree and then kill it. Or also indirectly, this is through these allelopathic chemicals. And to be fair, many plants do release allelopathic chemicals, but again, it comes down to these are novel plants, novel chemicals, and the organisms in their environment have not evolved with them, so they cannot tolerate them. So a lot of these plants will release these chemicals through their roots. A lot of times this is, it's ultimately just a tool for plants to kind of create their own space. Nobody really likes, I see you're all kind of spaced out a couple of feet away from each other. Everybody feels comfortable with that. If somebody next to you was sitting right next to you, you might not like that. You'd want a little space. So that's how plants do that, is releasing some of these chemicals through their roots into their soil that they like that environment, but their neighbors don't. So invasive plants release a lot of these chemicals, and also everything around it is not, they're not used to it because it's novel. And even our microbes, it basically will suppress microbial activity in these soils. And the big impact comes from not only the reason why a lot of our native plants don't like it is because these allelopathic compounds will actually prohibit development of mycorrhizal fungi. Have you guys heard of that mycorrhizal fungi before?
Yep.
Have you ever heard of like how trees talk to each other in their roots kind of thing? The wood wide web maybe? Well, what that is referring to, that's the kind of the common term to describe these mycorrhizal fungi networks. So all these plants are basically tapping into these mycorrhizal fungi that kind of connect the forest. And as you can see here, there's kind of a graph, that downward trend when you have allelopathic chemicals in the soil from invasive plants, you see the colonization of mycorrhizal fungi really kind of plummet. So thinking about that little pine seedling there, all of that biomass, that root biomass, that's all mycorrhizal fungi. The only tree root there is maybe a little straggling taproot in the middle. Other than that, it's mycorrhizal fungi and fusing to that root and then building off of it. So the mycorrhizal fungi are providing nutrients to the tree, access to water, access to nutrients. And then that little seedling is photosynthesizing and giving that mycorrhizal fungi carbon and allowing it to grow. So a symbiotic relationship that again, with invasive plants, you don't have the fungi, and that's why you typically will see a huge reduction in tree regeneration. And it's because of the lack of mycorrhizal fungi in the soil. All right, and then ultimately that leads to those kind of successional impacts. So that is, that's why we don't have regeneration, and why sometimes you may not see the successional tract kind of go the way that we would like it to when invasive plants are present. And then these plants also really impact food webs. So again, thinking about the evolutionary history, a lot of our wildlife kind of feed or benefit from the plants that they've evolved with. Again, these plants, nothing have evolved with these plants here, so they're not utilized by a lot of our organisms. Okay, and kind of what that looks like, an example of that. So just one example. There's hundreds, but this is one that folks can typically relate to. I guess we can kind of start in the bottom right there. This is we have a chrysalis on a leaf. The adult butterfly emerges, lays eggs, and then caterpillars emerge from the eggs. And then we see birds coming off and basically picking off those caterpillars and taking them to their nest and then raising their young. Right, everybody's pretty familiar with this process, right? Okay. So what is Maine state bird? Yep. And how many days are chickies in the nest for? 6 16 days. Oh, went too fast. How many caterpillars do adult chickadees need to find to get their young out of their nest?
6,000 to 9,000.
Yep, six to nine, six. Oh, I'm sorry. 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars these parent chickadees need to find to get their young out of their nest in 16 days.
Is that per chick?
Per nest.
Oh.
Yeah, for one brood. So kind of one nest, one clutch. Roughly 500 insects, these birds need to find per day. One nest. If you want one nest on your property, you need.
Caterpillars will eat those.
So I don't know. But you ultimately need to, basically be producing caterpillar factories, on your properties, and it really takes, native plants to do that. So again, a lot of these caterpillars, when you compare something like an oak forest or a maple understory, something like that on the right there, an oak can support 500 different species of insects and caterpillars. On the left, a lot of these invasive plants can maybe support 1 or 2, maybe 3 species of insect and caterpillar. So you can really see how biodiversity really kind of plummets in food webs. And that kind of works itself all the way up in the food web. So, here we have native plants feeding our native insects. And that was just one example with birds, but that really kind of trickles into higher trophic levels as well. So this is kind of an interesting quote in the bottom right. Of all plant eaters, caterpillars transfer more energy from plants to other animals than any other organism. So ultimately we have the sun putting a ton of energy into plants, and it's really the insects that are taking that energy and getting that into the animal kingdom. But again, insects cannot benefit from native plants, or very little, a lot less, we'll just say that. Just some kind of bigger landscape level impacts. As native species are outcompeted on the landscape, we see a displacement of natives, a reduction of native seed sources, obviously. But then again, kind of that reduction of tree regeneration, a loss of trees, loss of functional diversity, and a reduction of biomass. Kind of once that happens, we see our ecosystems being degraded. So changes to soil health and development without that biomass. Changes to forest structure, not in a good way. Changes to forest succession, and also less organic inputs and reduction of biodiversity. And kind of, again, as that happens, then we really see big impacts to ecosystem service benefits. So kind of what we all depend on, to all life on Earth really depend on these ecosystem service benefits that are really compromised. So less carbon sequestration and a kind of loss of critical habitat and poor water filtration in our riparian areas. Kind of what that looks like. And, with alleopathic chemicals and invasive plants, we'll tend to see more bare exposed mineral soil underneath these patches of invasive plants and less ground cover vegetation. And ultimately in a riparian area, that'll lead to more runoff and sedimentation and erosion, more embeddedness, which is a poor fisheries habitat. So on the top right there, that's actually an example of embeddedness, on kind of that bottom picture, that's 100% embedded. So basically all of the sediment is blanketed by silt, and that's called 100% embeddedness. Where on the top, you have nice clean cobble. And it's really our stoneflies and mayflies that kind of get in between that cobble and to kind of feed on and also get away. Stoneflies and mayflies kind of live on the underside of those rocks and cobble, and then those little fish need to get in there to get them. But if that system's all blanketed, you lose the aquatic systems, aquatic insects, and the fish go as well. And then also huge issues to bank stabilization and erosion and eutrophication events. Also, light levels really change. So, trees, again, kind of shade our waterways. Invasive plants kind of prohibit the growth of trees and allow for more solar radiation entering our water, and also reduction of coarse wooded debris. All right, hand it off to Sam here.
All right, I'm a little bit up against the gun, so there are going to be some things that I skipped through a little bit quickly, but I'm also going to talk about a few things more than once. So if it seems like I'm reiterating myself a few times, it's because we really want you to know that thing. So going going to start talking about sort of what we can do. And this slide's going to give sort of a broad overlook of some of the things I'm going to talk about. Wrap it up a couple minutes after. Sweet. Okay. All right. So this is going to be sort of a theme as I talk about management and working with invasive species as a whole, but consistent monitoring when you're working with invasive species is probably the most important aspect of management. If you're not really sure what you're dealing with or how much of what you're dealing with, you're not going to be able to effectively deal with that thing. So consistent surveying and assessment of places like seed sources, high probability dispersal areas, those disturbed areas, all things that Chad had talked about earlier in this talk. And then also recognizing that invasive plant treatment isn't a one and done kind of a scenario. So you're going to need pre and post harvest actions like consistent surveying and monitoring following treatment. And in that sense, understanding the biology of your invasive species is really important. More often than not, we hear stories of people dealing with an invasive species. They are super passionate about getting rid of it. So they get out there in June, they torch all of it down to the ground and they sit down and they kick their feet up, not knowing that that species actually flowers in September maybe. And really all they did was give that plant a kick in the butt to grow faster, produce more seeds come September. And really the problem's probably worse than if they had done nothing. I'm going to talk a lot more about hygiene in a second, but making sure that we're cleaning all of our equipment and all of our gear, and then approaching invasive plant management through this lens of early detection and rapid response, which I'm going to dive into pretty in depth soon too. So talking about preventing spread and hygiene, I'm going to mention monitoring again, those disturbed sites and those high dispersal areas. But people don't often talk about how important it is to be able to just simply ID your invasives. We have a lot of invasive species that not only look really similar to our native species, but also different invasive species that look really similar to each other, but may require wildly different management strategies. So making sure you know what you're looking at is a really important piece of that puzzle. We talked about hygiene. Chad had mentioned earlier that things like big equipment with big tires tend to pick up a lot of mud, really easy to transport seeds that way. So making sure that you're very thoroughly cleaning all of that equipment and all that gear. A great way to keep track of that cleaning regimen on your own property is to designate a cleaning area on your property. So if you're going out into the woods with an ATV or any kind of logging equipment, something like that, make sure you have a spot set aside on your own property where you do all of your cleaning. What that will prevent is that maybe you come back and you clean all over your property and you have invasive plants popping up in a bunch of different areas. If you have one designated area where you're cleaning off your equipment and all of your vehicles, it means you're able to come back and monitor that site and catch those invasive plants early before they become established and become a problem that you might not be able to handle anymore. And hygiene is really important for those of us that maybe aren't using those big equipment, the vehicles, things like that. I'm a big hiker, so I really stress on the responsible trail use when it comes to invasive species. We have boot brushes. I have a boot brush in the back that you guys can check out, but it's a really great way to clean off all of your clothes, your boots, getting those little crevices where you might be finding seeds. Making sure that you're staying on the trail is really important. If you're bringing dogs, making sure they're staying on the trail too. We talked a lot about disturbance, and trails are really great examples of forest disturbances where you have a lot of open light coming into the forest floor. And you've opened up a lot of new soil area for those invasive species to take hold on the edge of those trails. So making sure you're staying where you can responsibly hike and then continuing that outreach too. So making sure other people on the trail are aware of how to responsibly interact with the plants around them. And like Chad had mentioned earlier, invasive plants are really expert hitchhikers. So they're going to catch on to you at some point when you're out in the woods. It's important to be going through these responsible practices to make sure you're not taking part in transporting invasive species to new areas. So like I had said earlier, being able to properly ID these species and knowing where your seed sources are, cleaning yourself off, practicing good hygiene. We have a boot brush on the screen here, but also for things like vehicles, you could use leaf blowers. That's Chad up there in the top right, blowing off a car after we were doing stillgrass management down south. And recognizing where you might be picking up seeds. So if you have exposed fabrics on your boots or on your pants, making sure you're getting in there after you're leaving those natural areas. And there's tons of examples of this pushing invasive species our direction right now. So stillgrass is one that we're dealing with here in Maine. I'm going to talk a ton about that in a second, but stillgrass is pretty consistently moving up the Appalachian Trail right now with hikers picking up seeds in the mud on their boots. And this, we've talked about nursery hitchhikers too, but stillgrass is one of those nursery hitchhikers too. So nursery staff are interacting with infested stock and they have no idea. They bring the seeds home with them, and within a couple weeks, it's all over their lawn, all over their garden. And a pretty fun example of this, maybe not fun, but an interesting example, Wavy leaf basset grass is an invasive species moving north right now. It operates really similar to stilt grass, and it's becoming an emerging threat in disc golf courses in Pennsylvania, where disc golfers are going between courses around the state and they're not properly cleaning themselves off. And so they're bringing basket grass with them everywhere they go into these new disc golf sites. And it's consistently moving it northeast towards us. So nobody's exempt from good hygiene. Doesn't matter if you're working with an ATV or if you're hiking or if you're playing disc golf, making sure you know what's around you and practicing that good hygiene is super important. So I'm going to talk about early detection and rapid response now. So this is sort of the framework that we use when we're talking about management of invasive species. And it's important to understand where you are in what we call the invasion curve. This is a really important way that we look at early detection and rapid response. So this graph is the invasion curve. On the x-axis, we have time passing. And on the y-axis, we have an area infested by an invasive species, and then also the increasing control costs as invasive species gain more of a foothold. You can see down on the bottom of this graph right here where that little blue arrow is, that's our introduction point. So prior to an introduction, you can do all you want around prevention. But following introduction, there's a small window of time when an invasive species enters a new area. We call it the eradication phase, where there are small localized populations that are very disjointed and not connected to each other. And this portion of the invasion curve is really the crux of early detection and rapid response. We want to recognize these invasive species very early in their curve so that we can still feasibly eradicate them and keep our control costs really low. As we start to move outside of eradication, we're looking more at priorities like containment and asset-based protection. Those are really expensive and they're much less impactful than catching an invasive species early. Often our resource managers really only become aware of invasive species though in this containment phase. And so we'd like to shift that interception point to this eradication phase with early detection and rapid response. And like I had said earlier, consistent monitoring is really the key to this. Knowing what's coming your way, what seed sources you have around your area, and being on high alert for it as you're walking through your land and managing your land and resources is super important. All right, so I'm going to talk about some of the early detection and rapid response species we have here in the state of Maine. So these are our newly invading species that are pretty high priority for us to get at. And I'm going to talk about Japanese stiltgrass first. I would say that this is probably the highest priority invasive species we have in the state of Maine right now. So if there's only one thing you take away, being able to properly ID stiltgrass is really important. It is a annual grass. It's often about 1 to 3 feet tall at maturity. And it has this stilted root system. So you can see up at the top middle of the screen right there. That's how this plant gets its namesake. Above the ground, it'll send out these stolons, we call them, and they help prop the plant up. They have these alternate pale green leaves. And on the upper surface of that leaf is this thin silver midrib. None of our native grasses here in Maine have that silver midrib. So this is a really great characteristic to hang your hat on when you're trying to ID stiltgrass. And you can see it in that middle picture. As you get up close, it becomes really apparent really quickly. So always have your eye out for that silver midrib. And the leaves come to a point on both ends of the leaf. So you can see where it meets the stem in that bottom left picture. It's not a blunt end or it's not wrapping around the stem. It comes at a direct point. Now, because it's a grass, we have a lot of native lookalikes here in Maine. It can be really tough to ID this one out compared to some of our other invasive species. So here's some good tips when you're looking at a native or you're looking at a grass in Maine, trying to decide whether or not it's native or invasive. So over here on the left, we have 2 native grasses. We have white cutgrass and northern long-awned woodgrass. These are both really common grasses that pop up all around the state, including in forested sites where you might expect to find stiltgrass. So here are some important characteristics to look for when you're looking at native species. So our native species often have hairy rings or hairy tufts that are growing at the stem node. You can see that picture right there in the middle. Whereas invasive stiltgrass, if you can find any hair on the stem at all, it will be very sparsely distributed. I don't know if you guys can see it in the room on this picture, but it's very fine, very sparsely distributed. So if you see any kind of tuft of hair anywhere on the stem, you're probably not looking at stiltgrass. Like I had mentioned, you're looking for that shiny midrib, that stripe on the top of the leaf that goes from one end to the other. None of our native grasses have that. So that's always a really great dead giveaway for stiltgrass. The inflorescence or the structure of the flowers for this grass is really different. And that can be pretty tough if you're not accustomed to looking at grass all the time like Chad and I are. So this is a bit more of a difficult one, but you'll see that picture of stiltgrass up in the top right. It's got these short, fat, stout flowering heads. And there's typically 1 to 3 of them. And this species tends to flower in early September, late August. And then a really interesting way that you can tell the difference between these two species is a lot of our native grasses, if you were to go grab a leaf and run the leaf between your fingers, it would have that almost sticky, sort of grippy feeling to it. But stilt grass is actually covered in very fine hairs that you can't see with your eyes. So if you were to pick a leaf and rub it between your fingers, it would be really silky smooth in both directions. So it's a good way to sort of round out your identification. All right, so this here is a picture of one of our native grasses and one of or the invasive stilt grass. Is there anyone in the room that thinks they confidently know which one is which? Yeah, exactly. It's really tough, right? So this one here on the left is our native long-awned woodgrass. I have been caught hiking like 95 times at this point where I thought I found a new stiltgrass infestation, and you get down close to it. And what you don't see is what you see on the right here that got circled. So you can see that distinct silver midrib on the leaf right there. That is a really great characteristic. You'll never see it on this long-awned woodgrass. So when you get up close to a specimen, make sure you're looking for that silver midrib.
But ours doesn't grow as, I think that when I see grass growing in our woods or something, I see more of those patches than I've ever seen of that flourishing.
You transition perfectly into this next point. Exactly. So you might come back a year later and your long-awned woodgrass will look relatively the same. But when you come back maybe a couple years later for that stiltgrass patch, it's going to potentially have blanketed the entire forest floor.
Right.
It develops these really thick organic mats of organic matter all across the forest floor.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'll show you guys a map so you can see just how far it's gotten. So at this point, but it's a lot of reasons it's really bad for our forests because it creates those really thick layers of organic matter. Seeds have a harder time making it through to the ground, and it reduces germination rates and regeneration rates for a lot of our plants, especially our larger trees. Our larger seeded trees have an especially hard time getting their seeds through stiltgrass into contact with the ground, and so it can really impede forest succession. Overall, stiltgrass is highly competitive with our understory species, so we're reducing the complexity and the resilience of our forests where stiltgrass is introduced. Because it grows so dense, you see a reduction in carbon storage in the soil, so not good for any of our natives when that happens. Chad has talked about allelopathy already, and stiltgrass is one of the most allelopathic invasive species we have in the state. It's part of what makes it so competitive with our natives. And then because it's an annual, in the winter, it tends to just die back where it lays. And that leaves really thick, potentially 2 feet thick of dead thatch laying on our forest floors, which really increases the wildfire risk in Maine.
But I would think that it wouldn't survive because so many people traipse through the woods around. You're walking on all that.
It actually will help stiltgrass spread in a lot of instances. You can encourage the spread by walking through it. So this is a slide that I presented back in June talking about the current status of stiltgrass in Maine. At that time, we had 2 populations in Georgetown, 2 in Sanford, and 2 in York. Unfortunately, we found an extra one towards the end of our field season this past summer, and so we really cranked up our outreach about stiltgrass, and this is currently what the distribution of stiltgrass in Maine looks like. So those red and orange populations were ones that we were aware of as of this past year. And thanks to the additional outreach, we were able to find populations in South Berwick, West Gardner, Westport Island, and as far north as Blue Hill. And these all arrived in really different ways. I'm happy to talk to you guys individually about some of these sites, but a lot of them could have been prevented by a little bit more of consistent monitoring and knowing where your seed sources are coming from and being on top of that invasive plant monitoring program.
Or when you have it shown as an infestation or a detection, is there like a threshold? Like if it's just one clump and it can be eradicated, does it still show up as a detection, or does detection like designate that it's so established that it's there?
So any detection at all, just because it's so new, anything on this map. So the one in Blue Hill, for example, was just like a 2 foot by 2 foot clump that popped up that he went into us about. But they're definitely very variable. I mean, the populations in Georgetown, I think we have 115 active populations, something around that.
So are you killing it or what are you doing?
We're definitely trying to kill it. Yeah, we're doing everything in the book we can to get rid of it. We're going to combining a whole lot of management techniques, which I'll touch on in a second. But anywhere that we can manage it, we're working with a bunch of partners all over the state. If it's popping up on their land, we're hoping that we can get a little help from whoever's willing to help us. But yeah, we're doing a ton of management anywhere we can. We're bringing in a couple MCC crews this summer too to help manage it in some of these areas where it's really dense. And hopefully we can get out towards some of these new infestations and nip it in the bud pretty early in that invasion curve. This is another one of our EDRR species. I'm going to go through this one a little bit quicker and you guys will see why. This is a Persicaria species. So it's a tear thumb. We have a couple native tear thumbs here in Maine. But the most important thing that you should be looking for to ID this species is that triangular shaped leaf and that round modified leaf at the base of the petiole. It's called an ochrea. We have some native Persicarias, like I said, but this one's very distinctive compared to those two species. Look for that ochrea at the base of the leaf. That's the best way to identify it. Very uncommon for species here, especially in that genus. So look for that ochrea at the base of the petiole. We also have some bindweeds. These are not in the same genus, so they're a bit more difficult to confuse. But if you're ever looking at a bindweed, chances are it's not that. It's not going to have those hooked thorns all along the stem. Mile a minute vine was introduced to about 4 locations in Maine. We've been talking about nursery stock hitchhikers, and this is one of the worst of them. It was introduced in Topsham, Boothbay, Aldborough, and Winthrop. But thanks to a joint venture with DACF Horticulture, we were able to intercept this species pretty early in its invasion phase, or in its invasion curve. And as of today, we have no active populations of mile a minute in the state. However, there is, people in the room can't see it because it's covered up, but up in New Hampshire, there is an active population right now. So they dealt with an incoming nursery stock that became established. So the propagule pressure of this plant is increasing here in Maine. So making sure everybody's on the lookout for this one is real important.
Vine.
Yep.
It gets thorns on it.
It does, yep. You might be thinking of another vine.
But go back to that picture.
Okay.
Picture.
Long needle.
You know, like this is the situation, not so much in New Hampshire yet, but this is in Pennsylvania like this, and then also New York actually has a 5-acre situation looks just like that. So
5 acres.
yeah.
Wow.
What did we do? Take a sample and bring it out to you folks in Augusta? Or a picture's fine. Yeah.
Picture, okay, yeah.
So I can take.
I'll go to that
We got
tree.
some of that stuff on my land.
So if you think you have an EDRR species, we definitely want to know about it. So there are a couple avenues for you to report that to us. Chad has not a personal email. Don't send him personal emails. Reach out to Chad's work email. We also have a broader invasives program email. Take the diagnostic photos are really important. We've talked about some of these diagnostic characteristics. So make sure you're not just taking a picture of a plant from like 60 feet away and sending us a blurry picture. And then we also use a service called IMAP Invasives, so I'm going to delve into here. So this is our central repository for invasive plant data here in Maine. The state of Maine pays a subscription for this so that anybody in the state can use it for free. And our program manages the data that comes in. And IMAP is just about for anybody that deals with invasives at all. So we're looking for citizen scientists, landowners, conservation organizations, anybody that's interested in tracking invasive plant data or contributing to the broader tracking of invasive data around the state. We want you on IMAP Invasives. So it's a pretty simple process. You can get online, log in, create an account, download the app onto your phone, and then using your phone or this desktop version, you're able to upload records or occurrences of invasive species anywhere in the state. And we're able to verify those records on our end. And in that sense, you're able to access this broader database of data that you've contributed to and then people all over the state have contributed to. And this is a couple of screenshots of the desktop version. I don't want to get too deep into this because we're pressed for time, but a ton of really cool features on here. If anybody wants a bit of a rundown on how IMAP works or how to get started, come find me after the talk and I can give you some materials to get going. I do have to make the plug that I and the incoming seasonal staff are the one that are responsible for vetting every individual record that comes into IMAP for the rest of the summer. So good pictures are really important. More often than not, we get pictures that give us no information whatsoever. And even though the source is really reputable, we can't accept those sources because we just can't verify it on our end. So making sure you're getting good pictures of those diagnostic features are really important. And then for those of you that are interested in IMAP, I'll leave this up here so people can get pictures or screenshots on Zoom. But there's a bunch of great resources right here, and Chad's email is highlighted at the bottom. So feel free to reach out to us if you are having trouble with IMAP and you want to get started. We're happy to get you going. There's also options for you to set up organizations and projects. So there's a lot of flexibility here for people looking to get started in tracking invasives. All right, so we're talking about prioritizing management through this lens of early detection and rapid response.
Thank you.
A lot of times this is what an infestation will look like, right? You'll have this big core infestation and you'll have smaller satellite populations popping up outside of that. Less frequent the further away you get from that core infestation. And a lot of times the gut reaction is to go after that core infestation where you could potentially do the most damage, want to get in there and hack everything down. What's really important to realize is that looking at this through the lens of early detection and rapid response, This is an example of something we might want to contain, right? So we're past this eradication phase, so we're looking more as a priority of containment. And the best way to do that wouldn't actually to be go after this core infestation, but to start with those smaller invasions on the outside of your core infestation and to start moving inwards, right? You're not able to do any kind of feasible eradication without first containing your invasive population. So control work would actually begin on the outskirts of this population as you work towards the core and potentially towards eradication. But there are some situations where you might actually want to start your control work here. So if you had a river coming in towards your core infestation, let's say this was knotweed. Knotweed does really well in those flooded river zones, right? It helps move knotweed further down into new areas. So making sure that you start management here so that you're not dispersing knotweed maybe 5 miles down the river is an important aspect of this. So recognizing the status of your infestation is one thing, but also taking cues from the landscape around you is really important too, and making sure you're not contributing to a broader spread when you could be preventing that. And we use a framework in our management that's known as integrated pest management. So integrated pest management essentially describes bringing together a bunch of different tools, integrating a bunch of different pest management tools so that you can best attack your invasive species. So you guys have probably seen something similar to this, where you have mechanical options, you have chemical options, and you have cultural options for going after your invasive species. And a lot of times people only try one of these, or they try one, and when it doesn't work after like 3 years, they go, all right, let's just like drown it in herbicide and see what happens next. Really what we want people to be doing is to be using all of the tools available to them in an informed manner, right? So maybe you show up and chemical options would be the best way to control your species, but you have a wetland near you. So instead, you're going to use a combination of mechanical and cultural methods to sort of make up for the fact that you couldn't use those chemical methods, right? So there's no such thing necessarily as a first option and a last option, but rather a collection of tools that grows and changes as you make your way through management. Management is never just a one-time thing, like I had said earlier. So you're going to do that initial treatment, and what's going to be needed from you is that you're going to have to do 3 to 5 years of consistent monitoring following your initial treatment. And a lot of times what that reveals is that you're not actually done with treatment yet. In that 3 to 5 years, you're going to see populations try to rebound and try and fight back. And that means you're going to have to come back to this IPM framework and pick the best method for getting rid of your species from this monitoring stage. And there are ways you can get really creative with this. We've been recommending for buckthorn this high stumping method, which prevents the growth of root suckers when you cut it really low at the ground. We've been giving people this mesh tech method for knotweed, where you cut knotweed really low to the ground and you lay hardware fence over the cut stems, and they'll grow through it, and it'll actually impact their ability to send nutrients up and down the stem and really slow down that growth so you can get on top of it. And then this up here in the top right is we've been dealing with stiltgrass for a good amount of time now. So we've had to get creative in this past field season. So this is Chad going after it like a champ with the backpack flame weeder. So there's a whole lot of ways that you can get creative about IPM, but it's important that you're using all of the tools available to you and that you're consistently monitoring these populations. And I have talked about early detection already, but I'm going to harp on it one more time. Making sure you can find these plants early and recognizing what they look like when they're young is really the best way to stop yourself from getting to these giant populations. You might have a really large population on your property, but finding these satellite populations first and containing in what you have is the best way to ensure that you're not going to have a problem that gets out of your range of what you're able to do really quickly, really fast. And then I'm going to pass it back over to Chad really quick to wrap up.
Okay, thanks, Sam. Yeah, last slide, and I just want to let people know there is, some resources to find out who can do this work if you need somebody to help you. On our website and also on horticulture's website, there are some databases for folks doing control work. I'm not going to talk about this one because I think this is kind of to come, but it sounds like you'll have this at a later time. But there are some programs, some cost share programs that can also help you pay for some of this work as well. So a couple of those really quick are through NRCS. And also the Maine Forest Service has a new Woods-Wise resiliency program helping with some cost shares. So
next week we'll have Nicole Rogers and Andy Whitman here, and they're going to talk about climate resiliency and is that week 3? Week 3. Forgive me. Week 3. They'll be here talking about some of the Maine Forest.
So that one will be April 23rd. Next week, April 16th, we'll be doing SGCN. So with IF and W, you get to learn about the focus area itself.
Awesome.
Thank
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions, comments, concerns while we have everybody here still? Yeah, will you be having these books next week? Cause, you said you don't take any, credit cards or anything.
No, we will not be here next week. Although we will come to that woods tour. So we'll bring some with us then if you want today.
Okay, good. I'll bring 20.
And thanks everybody for tuning in online. I'll go back to Olivia.
Really quick. It looks like we have an online question.
We have a question in the room too.
Looks like we may
Oh,
review
yes.
these-
Thank you, Kay. Question in the room, please.
So. Non-expert thinking.
Yeah.
It seems like there's three big domains where you have a big problem. One is logging, big areas of that. The second one is development, whether it's industrial or residential. And the third one is agricultural, where you have large areas, large spreading. So I guess my question is, we kind of go back to, you know, when people do that, is there something that says, okay, you've now just devastated the side of this hill, cut all the trees out of there? Where someone goes in and looks at it and says, like, the forester or someone that says, okay, we need to go in here and check and make sure there's no invasive plants in there. Is there anything like that?
Well, I mean, ultimately, it would come down to the landowner, you know, to make sure, again, kind of, you know, when you do create these disturbances, make sure you're doing that monitoring and following up.
But they're not gonna.
I guess it all depends on the landowner, you know, but,
Yeah.
but also,
Right.
yeah.
I bet he didn't.
I wouldn't know. I mean, I see guys cutting it. You go riding around Leeds and into the other, you know, local area town, and just hillsides cut all over.
Oh, yeah.
They walked away from it and it's just.
Yeah,
Well, that's why I was-
stepped out back
big
of my-
splash
You know,
pile.
that's why, you know, this year we're actually doing, our, you know, full day workshops in Aroostook County, you know, like, that's why we do 30 to 40 outreach events a day, because the more that we can get this messaging out and these impacts and how they spread, we're hoping that will eventually change, but ultimately, yeah, it really just comes down to the landowner to make sure, you know, to try to make sure that happens. And
Yeah.
even when you think about like hygiene, you know, we really recommend that folks get, you know, get it right in the contract. If you are gonna have somebody doing work on your property or logging, making sure that it's embedded in the contract that this equipment is being cleaned, before it comes on site, you know, things like that. And, yeah.
There's no real great regulatory way to make sure it happens. So right now, the best that we can do is education and hope that
Yeah.
we can educate folks enough that they'll care enough to
That's why we're here today.
prioritize it, right? That's why we're doing.
And now you guys can go to your neighbors and be like, hey, pal.
You guys can change-
Hey, pal.
So the speed forces, we maybe use a different word, but I would have no clue on how to know whether there's a bad player a half a mile. I don't know how you're doing.
So you may not need to know about a half mile away, but what would be important to know is about if you have a dispersal port, if you have a trail coming to you, connectivity, water, you know, flowing water coming in, a road coming in, then it would be important to monitor.
I'd be actually more, and I could be wrong, but to me, it was, you know, the wind direction with seeds and stuff, I'd be most concerned about, you know, wind and wildlife.
Well, yeah, I mean, to be fair, a lot of these invasive plants are not necessarily wind dispersed,
Okay.
you know, but wildlife a little bit, but again, that's where, yeah, mentioned maybe monitoring your game trails, but knowing any potential dispersal corridors, you don't necessarily need to worry about a half mile away, worry about your, you know, your property and what's coming into your property. And then that's where those a lot of times too, like, a lot of people too, they may not know how to identify all these basic plants, right? But I bet you know a lot of native ones, you know?
I don't.
No? Oh, okay. So a lot of times if it doesn't look normal or like familiar to you, then it may warrant a little bit more investigation. And then just having these apps on your phone now, all you have to do is, if you're not sure, pull out your phone and point your camera at it, tell you what it is.
I do it a lot. A lot. Every time I go outside, I pull out my phone, I take a picture and I'm like, oh yeah, that is this plant. This is a raspberry. That is a white pine seedling.
And we've also been doing some work too, quantifying all the invasive plants by county. So you know, we can even, you know, email me, I can send you a list of exactly what's in your neighborhood. You know, and then maybe just learn those 10 and then look out for those 10.
And an average user on IMAP invasive seed confirmed
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so that's another thing.
You technically don't even have to have an account to see that data too. Even if all you wanted to do was just log on one time and like it was around your house, you could log on and see every invasive plant that was within a certain range of your house really easily.
That's been reported and verified. There might be lots more.
You could even create a horizon scanning alert around your property and say, if anybody documents a new invasive plant within a mile from you, you'll get an email.
Oh, that is, yeah.
If you have landowners that don't live in the area, but then they come and they strip off a whole big thing, and I have no way of going onto their property, and I can walk on their property, I can't do anything about it, but I don't want, until today, I would not have even known. I should go down there and look and see what came out after they stripped the land and just left it.
Yeah.
It's enormously frustrating.
Yeah.
I don't think even town officials are aware of this, like ATVs. I just learned today a lot of stuff like ATVs, they're going everywhere, these kids. And they probably don't realize that they're spreading invasive species everywhere. Because I had stuff come in my field and on my land in different areas and have no idea where that stuff is coming from. But now I can see ATVs have gone through, hikers have gone through, and just yesterday I had some ATVs that wanted to go on my land. I said, no, but the reason I did that is because they're very destructive. They go in there and they do 360s on your land. They dig up the land, they dig up the small trees you planted. They have, it's a different world now. A lot of these people have no respect for other people's land anymore. They used to, but they always used to ask permission before they go on your land. Now you get people, you catch them and.
I actually had the snowmobile club when it was running leave. I asked them to move their trail because they were destroying the land and they were going over these big roots that had tall trees.
Oh, yeah.
And then there was a beaver dam down below and so they did come, they rebuilt the bridge and they moved the trail about 6 feet in the opposite direction. So they stopped going over the tree root. But if you don't go and check on them and check and walk your property, which I haven't done in years, but you
have to walk your property now.
That's what I was gonna say too, not so much for the human impact, but also walk your property and walk those trails and see what's popping up, and again, you guys might not know all the invasives, but I give you credit, you're gonna know if something